The winter of 1349 carved death into the earth itself. Starving villagers dug graves before the bodies even stopped moving, and smoke rose endlessly from the thatched remains of towns reduced to ash. Alina, just 6, walked barefoot along a frozen road, eyes too sunken for tears. Her mother had succumbed 3 nights before, curled around her baby brother's lifeless form. By the time the soldiers came, she no longer feared them. They wore the king's colors, heavy cloaks over rusted armor, eyes dulled by days spent combing through plague pits and ghost villages. Alina offered no resistance when a man hoisted her up, more bone than child. She was not the only orphan they found that day, but she was the one who made them stop. God above, one whispered, she has her eyes. No one said whose, that didn't matter. A name was enough. The captain ordered her to be taken to the court. Word had traveled quickly. The queen was dead too. Winter's gone now, but the king had never taken another. Her portrait still hung in the marble hall, untouched, draped with black velvet. The child, cleaned and barely alive, was presented to him quietly. She stood trembling in white rags as he descended the dais. His lips moved as he whispered the queen's name, not hers, Isolde. She looked nothing like royalty. Her cheeks were hollow, hair matted. But the moment his hand brushed her chin, the court froze. The resemblance wasn't just physical. It was something in her expression, fragile, haunted. She didn't flinch. She simply looked back. He ordered her to be renamed and clothed. A monk was summoned, one with a reputation for visions and interpretations. He examined the child's face under candlelight and declared it a sign, a divine return, a second chance. He read aloud the tale of a Roman empress reborn as a servant girl to restore balance to the empire. The queen has come again, he said, and the child is chosen. The child was washed in rosewater. Her hair was brushed until it gleamed. Jewels, once worn by the real Isolde, were placed on her wrists, though they slid right off. A dress was cut down to size and a veil stitched overnight. She was not asked if she understood. The next morning, she stood before the altar of the royal chapel. The king placed a ring on her finger. The priest called it a sacred binding of souls. She was now, in every legal sense, Queen Isolde. The court murmured. It was unorthodox, but not unprecedented. Marriage had always been a tool. A silent girl with no past, no family, no demands. What better ghost to wear the crown of a dead woman? She didn't cry during the ceremony. She looked up at the high windows, tracing the dust motes in the morning light. They danced like snowflakes. Afterward, she was taken to a small stone chamber beside the royal apartments. Not the queen's chamber that one remained sealed, but close enough for the illusion to remain intact. The king visited often. He never touched her, beyond placing a hand on her head, murmuring lullabies in a language she didn't understand. Sometimes he brought flowers from the queen's garden. Sometimes he brought silence. She listened. Her old name faded, not all at once, but in pieces. It slipped away each time someone called her Your Grace, every time her hand was guided to sign the new name on a piece of parchment she couldn't read. No one mentioned the village, her mother, or her baby brother. Those memories curled up inside her and slept. She learned to sit still through court meals, where she was given small portions of buttered bread and warm milk. The other nobles avoided her eyes. The servants whispered, "Ghost bride." They said the dead queen walks again. She was not allowed to speak unless spoken to. Her voice, unused, grew soft and unsure. A tutor came to teach her Latin prayers and royal gestures. He corrected her posture with a long rod, tapping her shoulders until they ached. "Queens do not slouch," he'd mutter. She learned to smile just enough, never too wide. The smile had to match the portrait. One night, she asked the servant who dressed her if she could have her own dress. Something simple. The servant flinched and whispered, "Do not speak that way." From then on, she didn't ask again. The king began to call her by pet names the old queen had once known. He read letters to her that she couldn't understand. He told her stories of battles, of love, of sorrow. Sometimes he wept when she fell asleep. She listened without knowing why she was there. She watched the king's face more than his words. Sometimes he seemed kind. Other times, he stared through her like she wasn't there at all. Years blurred into ritual. Alina lived each day copying a dead woman. She was not taught who she was, only who she must appear to be. And one morning, as snow drifted past the stained glass and candles flickered in their sockets, she realized she hadn't heard her true name in over a year. She mouthed it once in secret. Under her breath it felt foreign. Wrong, she was no longer Alina. She was Queen Isolde now, and she was not allowed to forget it. She woke at dawn, always before the bell rang. Cold seeped through the stone walls and into her bones, no matter how many furs they layered on the bed. Her chamber, though near the royal quarters, had no fire in winter unless permission was granted. She learned not to ask. Instead, she moved, in silence, folding her blankets neatly as the maid entered with water too cold to touch. Washing was brief, no perfumes, no oils, just enough to be made presentable. Breakfast was served only if she'd followed the evening routine precisely. Bread, no butter. Water, not milk. Some mornings, she ate nothing. They said queens did not complain. She sat at a small table alone, her food watched over by a steward who noted whether she finished. Every bite, a measure of obedience. One morning, she left a crust untouched. By nightfall, the tutor made her kneel on salt for an hour in penance. Her schedule never changed. Latin recitation with Father Aldwin, who struck the table when she faltered. Then embroidery under Lady Cecile's bitter eye. She wasn't to embroider flowers of her choosing, only symbols from the Queen's old patterns. Her hands bled from the needle's prick, but she wasn't allowed to stop. The real Isolde, they reminded her, had stitched without flaw. Lunch was a shared silence with nobles who bowed their heads but never met her gaze. She saw only their discomfort, their contempt masked by etiquette. None acknowledged she was a child. In their eyes, she was the past returned, a burden dressed in silk. Every whisper, every glance reminded her she didn't belong. She wore their silence like another layer of skin, when not under instruction. She was made to sit in the Queen's old reading room, a place now too empty to feel sacred. Books lined the shelves, but she wasn't taught to read. She turned pages, only to keep her hands busy. The guards outside the door never spoke. They were not there to protect her. They were there to contain her. She once tried to speak with a serving girl, asking her name. The girl dropped the tray and was taken away. Alina never saw her again. After that, no one came close, unless ordered to. She was a statue in a living tomb. She learned to mimic the Queen's posture from the tapestries. She learned to keep her chin slightly tilted, never too proud, never too low. She memorized hymns she didn't understand because they said the Queen had loved them. Every movement, every gesture, was borrowed. Nothing belonged to her. Even her voice was coached to sound softer, sweeter, like a woman long dead. Hunger never left. Meals were small and often cold. She drank boiled wine to keep warm and was told it was medicinal. When she fainted once during prayers, they called it divine sensitivity, not weakness. The monks said she was a vessel now, a symbol. Flesh mattered less than meaning. The mute boy who cleaned the halls began leaving small scraps of fruit near her bench in the reading room. No one saw. She never spoke to him, but she waited for them every day, and he never failed. One day, the fruit stopped. A week later, she overheard that a boy had been whipped for stealing from the kitchen. She cried that night, quietly, into the pillow. Years passed in the rhythm of silence and submission. She turned 9, then 10. Still the Queen, still untouched. The king visited less frequently, but when he did, he brought with him a distant tenderness. He looked through her, as though speaking to a ghost. He told stories of the old queen's laughter, how she danced in spring rain. Alina nodded, smiled when required. She pretended to remember memories that weren't hers. Disease was always near. The palace wasn't immune to the filth of medieval life. Rats moved through the walls. Fleas bit through silk. Servants coughed blood behind closed doors. Twice she was moved to another wing for protection, isolated from even the few faces she saw regularly. Each time she returned, someone was gone. She began to speak less, not from fear, but from forgetting how to speak to people who listened. Her words were tools, and tools unused grow dull. She dreamed in silence, walked in silence, obeyed in silence. Her reflection in the polished silver plates became a stranger, eyes older than her years. Once, a visiting noble asked why the child queen never spoke. The king answered, "She speaks when it matters." That night, he brought her a necklace that once belonged to Isolde. She thanked him, as taught curtsy, eyes down, soft voice. He smiled, satisfied. She was becoming what they wanted, an echo, a memory dressed in velvet, nothing more. On her 11th birthday, they held a quiet mass in her name. No one mentioned the age difference. No one dared question the title. She stood in the chapel, hands clasped, lips moving through rehearsed prayers. She wondered if anyone had ever lit a candle for the real girl she used to be. Probably not. No one remembered her name. And now, neither did she. The transformation began slowly. At 12, her face no longer mirrored the dead queen. The rounded cheeks it sharpened. Her eyes no longer held that fragile, ethereal light that once stirred the king's memory. Whispers began again, not of miracles, but of fading illusions. Servants looked longer now, and differently. The monk who once called her divine stopped bowing when she passed. Her hair darkened in winter, and someone murmured that the queen had been golden-haired. The resemblance was slipping, and with it, the only thing that had protected her. The king visited less and less. When he did, his tone had changed. His stories turned bitter. His hands clenched tighter around the wine goblet. One evening, he stared at her for a long time and muttered, "You're not her anymore." She said nothing. The next morning, she was moved from her chamber to a wing farther from the court, where no candles burned and the windows barely opened. The new room was colder, but the message was colder still. She was no longer needed. Her meals were delayed. Her gowns went unmended. The silence she once used for survival now marked her as invisible. The guards outside her door had changed. They did not avert their eyes. They watched her with impatience, as if daring her to speak out of turn. In the great hall, a noblewoman from Aquitaine arrived with gifts and laughter. She was young and tall, with curling red hair and clever wit. The king laughed in ways Eleanor had never heard before. At the next mass, the foreign lady was seated beside him. Alina, once at his right hand, was given a seat near the rear. She remained silent. She understood. A week later, the foreign lady was announced as the king's betrothed. The court cheered. A feast followed. Alina was not invited. That night. The door to her chamber remained unlocked. She stepped into the hall and wandered through corridors until she reached the garden. A guard stopped her. When she said she wanted air, he grabbed her wrist and asked if she thought herself a queen. She said nothing. He shoved her back inside. The bruise on her arm faded, but not the echo of his words. She tried to run. Once, before dawn, she slipped out through the kitchens. She didn't get far. Caught before she reached the outer wall, she was dragged back barefoot and locked in the chapel's crypt, without food or light. They called it cleansing, penance for rebellion. The monk, who had once called her chosen, now lead the prayers for her soul's correction. 3 days passed. Alone, no words, no sound but her own breathing. She sang to herself in whispers, broken Latin prayers, and made up lullabies. Her voice cracked, but she refused to cry. On the fourth day, they brought her out and shaved her head. A ritual act, they said, symbolic of humility. She wasn't told what would come next, only that the king had decreed she be prepared for monastic life. No more dresses, no more titles. She was to be remade again, this time into silence for good. Before her departure, she was summoned once more to see the king. He sat at the high table, alone. She stood before him, a girl stripped of every borrowed thing. He asked if she remembered the day he first saw her. She didn't answer. He nodded slowly and whispered, "You should have stayed small. You should have stayed hers." He dismissed her without a farewell. She was taken to a broken abbey by the sea, a place crumbling into the cliffs. Nuns with tired faces and downturned eyes received her with politeness, not warmth. She was not welcomed. She was assigned a corner cell, no books, no fire. She was told to keep to the shadows, away from the others. There, days became measures of light and cold. No visitors came. No one used her name. The nuns called her child, and sometimes sister, though no vows had been taken. She swept the stones, tended the garden, and lit candles she never prayed by. Her thoughts grew quieter, but sharper. She remembered her real name in flashes, then lost it again. Her hands grew calloused. Her voice disappeared entirely. She once saw her reflection in a puddle. She didn't look like the queen anymore. She didn't look like anyone. Years passed. She bled for the first time alone in the woods. No one marked the moment. There was no ceremony, no woman to explain it. She cleaned herself in a stream and returned to her duties in silence. Rumors spread that a new plague was rising. One by one, the nuns grew pale and vanished into locked chambers. She was made to clean the infirmary, scrubbing blood from the stone floors. Her hands cracked, her skin burned, her breath grew shallow. No one comforted her. She lay awake one night, watching the moonlight shift across the wall, and wondered if anyone remembered her face. The answer settled in her chest, like cold ash. No one did, and no one would. She died in silence, without ceremony, without witness. Her final days blurred between fever dreams and cold stone. The coughing started in early autumn, deep and dry, but she hid it well. Illness had no mercy in the abbey. Those who grew weak were isolated behind wooden doors, with crosses carved in chalk. She kept sweeping floors, lighting candles, bowing her head. But her strength thinned, her fingers trembled, her breath shortened. One morning, she collapsed while scrubbing the altar steps. No one rushed to her. A novice dragged her to the back cell and shut the door. The straw mattress was damp. The ceiling dripped with condensation. She lay there 3 days. A nun slid bread under the door once. It remained untouched. She had no hunger left, only fragments. She saw the king's face, once kind, then distant. She saw the monk's eyes when he'd called her chosen. She remembered the chapel, the bells, the weight of the ring on her tiny finger. Then she saw her mother's hands, rough and warm. The faint smell of smoke and bread from a village long burned. She spoke her name aloud, not Eswita, not sister. Judith, her name, the real one, Eleanor. It cracked out of her lips like a dying ember. Then silence. The next morning, they found her body curled inward, hands clenched. The nuns didn't ring a bell. They wrapped her in cloth and buried her, in the far field behind the abbey, where the unmarked dead lay. No cross, no words. Just another victim of plague or penance. The grave was shallow. Earth froze early that year. Inside the abbey, her cell was cleaned quickly. Her belongings, a comb, a worn shift, a scrap of ribbon were burned. Her name was not written in the abbey's records. There was no mention of her in the royal registry. To the world, she never existed. A queen who was never crowned. A girl who was never chosen. A shadow of another woman's memory. Back at court, the king had grown old. The new queen bore him sons. They filled the halls with noise and future. No one spoke of the child who came before. Her portrait was removed quietly one winter. The chamber she once slept in was given to a foreign guest. When someone asked about the queen who had died young and strange, an old steward muttered, "She was a mistake." A monk, once favored by the king, scribbled notes of his visions from decades ago. In the margin of an old book, he wrote, "The girl resembled her. We thought it was providence. Perhaps it was madness." The ink faded over time. Years later, a storm shattered part of the abbey wall. A young laborer, tasked with clearing the rubble, found a small stone among the weeds. Carved into it, faint and crude, were the words, "I was Eleanor. I lived." He showed it to a priest, who laughed and said it was likely a joke or fable. The boy left the stone by the sea cliff. Rain washed it clean within days. No songs were written for her. No saints claimed her suffering. History moved on, naming kings and queens, saints and sinners. But not her. She was too small, too misplaced. Her life had been absorbed into another's image, and when she no longer served it, she was discarded. Not by hatred, not even by cruelty, but by indifference. And that was the truth of her erasure. In a world that worshipped lineage, appearance, and divine order, there was no place for a girl who reminded a grieving man of a lost wife. There was no chapter in the annals of England for a child pawned to grief. She existed between margins, between whispers, between prayers never meant for her. And though she once wore the crown, touched its cold metal, and heard the lies called blessings, she was not remembered. The forgotten Queen of England had been real, not in bloodlines or records, but in breath, in pain, in stolen identity. And she was gone.